Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hello, hello. So we're going to get started very shortly. We're just going to wait to get as many people as we can into the chat room, or into the room, actually. Zoom. And we will get started on increasing. Yay.
Where's everyone from? Post where you're from in the chat if you.
New York. So I'm up here in still snowy Montreal, Canada. Hi. Alrighty. So hello and welcome to our Tutorial Tuesdays, sponsored by Zen Yarn Garden. My name is Anik St. Louis, and I will be hosting this evening, teaching you 5 different ways of increasing, because you can never have too many tools in your toolkit. So there we go. With us also tonight is Suzanne Nielsen, who's also a rep. I'm a rep, by the way, up here in Canada. Suzanne is a rep out in California for now. We also have Roxanne, who is with us. We won't see her, but we'll see her hand. She wants to wave at us. There she is. Hi, Roxanne. So Roxanne is the head honcho here at Zen Yarn Garden. She is the creative director who originally started the company and who now runs it with her husband, Neville, who is also somewhere in the background. We might hear a hey at some point, but there we go. So let's jump right into our first increases, because we've got lots of stuff to show you and very little time to do it in. So let's get to it. Alrighty, first sample. So here we have our first sample, which is what we call a bar increase. Now, why is it called a bar increase? Because it's got a little bar. Look at that. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, some of you might be familiar with this technique of increasing. It's also known as a knit front and back, a KFB. So without further ado, here is the knit front and back. So in the interest of speed tonight, I'm going to try not to drop my needles too often. And I'm just going to be showing them to you one after the other on this very wide piece of knitting. So knit front and back is pretty self-explanatory. You will knit into the first stitch where it says do a knit front and back. So you're going to knit into the leading leg. Now the leading leg is the one that presents itself first. So knit front, and then you're going to swing your needle around and you're going to reknit that same stitch, but through the back leg. I'm going to show you that one more time. No worries. And we already see a little bar here, which is why it's called a bar increase. So once again, knit into the front of the stitch. Don't drop it off, not yet. Swing all the way around. Now I'm going to stretch it out so that you can really see. Stretch it all the way around and go knit into the back leg, which is right here. I'm going to try to, there we go. Knit into the back leg. And there we go. Bar increase, also known as a KFB, or sometimes you will see it as a K1FB in your pattern, and it should be a knit front and back. Now, a knit front and back, one thing to keep in mind. Now, in the interest of consistency, all my samples, I did 2 edge stitches, knit 1, and then I did the increase either on the stitch or between the 2 stitches. So between 1 and 2, between the last and the second last. So we can see here the knit front and back, it looks a little awkward. It looks a little bit heavier on this side than it does on this side. Now, why is that? Is because the bar appears on the stitch after when you do the increase, because this is an increase that's worked on a stitch. So in the interest of making things symmetrical, which I love symmetry, I love purposeful asymmetry. I don't like not purposeful asymmetry. This is not doing it for me. My love of symmetry is not liking this. So how do we fix it? We fix it this way. So in order to get a perfectly symmetrical knit front and back increases, both at the beginning and the end of the row, I did my 2 edge stitches and I immediately did my knit front and back on the very first stitch. At the end of the row, I did it on the 2nd stitch from the last one. And that is how you get a perfectly symmetrical knit front and back. So that is knit front and back, also known as a bar increase. Moving right along. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. Suzanne is keeping an eye out for the chat. And I'm trying to keep an eye out for raised hands. So if I'm going too fast, just slow me down. It's okay. We've got time. Ish.
I'll interrupt you.
So also another way of increasing, which is on a stitch. I should have mentioned this first. I am starting with increases that are done on stitches first, and then we'll move on to increasing between stitches after. So second method of doing an increase on a stitch is what we call a raised increase. Now a raise, if edge stitches it's just garter. That's all I'm doing is 2 stitches of garter and then 1 stitch of stockinette. That's it. So raised increases look like this. Now we have a right leaning raised increase and a left leaning raised increase, because the knit front and back, in case you didn't notice, there's just one way of doing it. Even if you go knit back and front, it just gives you a twisty old mess, doesn't work. Knit front and back, there's one way of doing it. Raised increases have 2 ways. We have a right leaning and a left leaning. And let's go look at how we do them. So in order to do a right leaning raised increase, I'm going to go raise up the stitch below the one where I want to do my increase. So I'm going to raise that up onto my needle and I'm going to knit that one again. Pop it off and oh, look at that. 1 stitch increased. That's it. That is all. Look at that. Done like dinner. Oh wait, dinner's not done yet. All right, let's look at that one again. So raised increase, right leaning. I'm gonna go, so this is where I want my increase. I'm gonna go raise up the stitch below the one where I need to increase so that I can go knit that one again. There we go. Pop that off and knit the actual stitch. And you're done. Right leaning increase. Now, in order to do the left leaning increase, it's a little, just not more complicated, but you're going to need to look a little bit closer, because in order to do a left leaning increase, you actually do it after where you need to do the increase. So in order to do the left leaning, I'm not going to go into the first stitch below, because that's the one I just did. I'm going to need to go 2 below. So this is the one that I just knit and the second one beneath it. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the other side, on the right leaning, except this time I'm going to come from the left. So I'm going to go pick up that first leg, stretch it out a little bit. Now, if you can see here, I'm going to try to make that closer. The way that I picked it up, the leading leg is in the back. Now, if you want to pick it up in the other direction so that it's mounted correctly, by all means do that. I just find it a lot simpler to go from the back of the leg here and then simply knit it into the back leg. Now, there's no absolute way of doing this. It's really a question of personal preference. As long as the end result looks like that, you're golden, you're good to go. So let's look at that again. Now, left leaning raised increase. I'm not going to go into the first one. I'm going to go into the second stitch below the one on my right hand needle. Again, this is for a left leaning increase. So I'm going to go pick up that bar. Now it just happens that the stitch, the leading leg, is in the back. So I'm going to go knit into that leading leg.
Maybe if you did it wrong, it would look kind of twisted, but
it would definitely look twisted. It would, one, it would
show
be
it to
almost
us.
impossible because it's definitely very tight.
It's very
And
tight. Okay.
it's
So
going to
pull
look
that.
like a big old mess when you're done. So,
Yeah. So you'll know if you've done it that way.
if it feels too tight, you're probably not doing it right. Trust your instincts on this. It's like when you're knitting and you're not paying attention and all of a sudden a stitch doesn't feel right. You know you've probably done something wrong, or you've probably like split the yarn or something has happened. You know to go check. So
the importance of reading your knitting, right? Or
yes,
looking at how it looks when you're done.
And feeling the knitting too. I mean, your hands will tell you so much. So again, left leaning raised increase, not the first, the second stitch below, pick up that leg, and then I'm going to go knit into the leading leg. Now the leading leg happens to be in back here, so I'm going to knit through the back leg. And there we go, a left leaning raised increase. Now,
nice. Before, yeah, go ahead. Show it to us. Maybe.
Yes. So here I did right leaning raised increases and left leaning increases on the left side. Now, just for science, because I love science and why not? I did the opposite up at the top here. I did a left leaning increase on the right side and a right leaning increase on the left side. So if you can see that they're very similar and yet oh so very different. When you look really closely, they definitely have a different look. So yes, a right leaning increase on the right is always a good choice. However, sometimes it can be interesting to switch them up.
Ooh, nice.
All right.
Before you move on,
yes.
We did have a question about knitting, doing the knit front and back one.
Yes.
Do you find ever, let's see, I can't remember who it was, but somebody asked if you ever get a hole there. They said that when they do theirs, they get a hole. Do you have any tips for not getting a hole?
You shouldn't be getting a huge hole. If you are getting a hole, it could be a number of reasons. If your yarn is cotton, a knit front and back is probably not the best idea.
Because you kind of have to stretch that stitch out
because you got to stretch that stitch out. Exactly. So the knit front and back does work better on something that will bounce back, like merino or sheep fiber.
Well, natural fiber.
Natural. Well, because alpaca won't bounce back. So
that's true.
Yeah. So you definitely want sheep. You don't want camelid.
Need some elastic. Yeah.
It needs elasticity. Exactly. So as to why there's a hole, it could be that needles were too big for the yarn. I mean, there is going to be a slight, tiny little hole, if you can see that, but it is generally a very discreet increase. It's also the one that's the one that disappears completely in garter stitch. It just disappears completely. I actually increased in here. You can't tell, can you? So there we go. Now, as to the specificities of why you're getting a hole, that would be, we'd need to see what material, what size needles. It could be a variety of things, but it shouldn't, you shouldn't be getting a hole on a knit front and back, because you're actually, yes, you are stretching out that one stitch, but you're creating two into it.
Yeah,
so it should kind of plug it up a little bit.
It might be just a matter of shuffling things around.
It could be, yeah, just to kind of squish and scooch and stuff around. I mean, it's yarn. Don't be afraid to pull it and, yank it and just play around with it. It'll bounce back. Yay. That's why we love fiber arts, because everything bounces back. Alrighty, so moving right along. If we don't have any more questions for those two, we're going to move on to increases that happen between stitches. Because as you may have noticed, both of those, both the bar and the raised increases happen on a stitch, or they need a stitch in order to happen, is probably better said. Now, the ones that we're going to look at now don't need a stitch to happen. So they happen between. And we're going to start with the simplest one of those. And again, like the knit front back, there's one way of doing it. And well, I mean, you could do a backwards yarn over, but there's not really any point. Yarn over. A yarn over is the simplest way of adding a stitch. Yarn over. And I keep knitting. And there I have added a stitch. Now be careful with the yarn over because you're also adding a hole. Yes. So yarn overs are definitely a decorative increase. Now, some of you may recognize this from lace knitting. It definitely is a technique that is often used in lace because it creates holes, which is the basics of lace. So increasing with a yarn over, just a regular yarn over will be absolutely fine, whether you're doing the left or the right, because once you knit it, it's going to lay flat just like any other stitch, and it does not have a direction. So as you can see, there is no right leaning or left leaning. There is simply a hole and a stitch above. Yay! We love yarn over increases. I love knitting lace, so yarn overs are one of my favorite ones. So once again, yarn over, and you've got your yarn over here, the hole beneath, and when you come back to it on the wrong side, you just knit it like it was a plain old stitch. So any questions on a yarn over increase? We're good? All right, moving right along. Next one, which is a little bit more involved, is called a backward loop. Now, a backward loop increase, you may have guessed it, you may have used it already, is often used when you're doing a top-down sweater and you have to cast on at the underarm in order to go around in the round again when you separate the sleeves from the body. You will often use a backward loop method. Now, a backward loop method, yes, has two ways. So backward loop, the one that you're probably familiar with, I'm going to create a loop with my yarn. Now I'm just taking my working yarn here and creating a loop. I simply flipped it over. Now, just for clarity's sake, I'm trying to show you here. There we go, my loop. My loop is showing me which direction this is going to lean. Now, as you can see, the top part of the yarn, if I do this, now, hopefully my camera isn't mirrored, is going left. So it is going left. Now, if I was to cast this on this way, I would get a left leaning increase. So in order to get a right leaning increase, I need to twist in the other direction. So instead of doing just the backward loop, which is the movement that most of us are familiar with, I'm going to do the opposite direction. Now, all I did was drop my yarn. That's all I did. I dropped my yarn. So in order to loop in the opposite direction, there we go. Now you see how it crosses, the right is on top of the left. I know that if I put this onto my working needle, I am going to have a right leaning increase. Right leaning, on it goes, Bob's your uncle. Done. So it does give me my little loop right there. Now, there it is again. Show it to you slower. So I'm doing the loop and on it goes. Now, if you might have noticed, I'm kind of scooching it, not quite picking it up this way, because if I do that, I end up with a yarn over. I actually need to pinch it. So I'm going to create the one that I need and then flip it over my needle. Did everyone see that?
Kind of twisting it around.
Twisting it around. So this is the one I need. This is the one I'm creating. I'm just going to pop it up and over my working needle so that when I pull, it's nice and tight. And you can actually see that it will be a right leaning increase. Now, one last time, because I know that one's a little flippity floppity. So I want a right leaning backward loop increase. So my working yarn, flip it so that the right is the one on top, and then scooch it onto the needle so that when I tighten, I get a nice tight. Oop. It's not flippity floppity and it's not just a yarn over. Now, left leaning is the one that most of us are familiar with because it's a natural feeling movement and it goes like that. So again, here it is. And this time I'm going to come from the front to pick it up. So plop it onto there and we're done. So once again, backward loop, creating the backward loop. I make sure that the left side, the left leaning one is the one on top. Pop it onto my needle. Now, what is this going to look like, you ask? Well, here is what it's going to look like. So here we have a right leaning yarn over and a left leaning backward loop, not yarn over, backward loop.
And when you're knitting, when you come to that stitch, you just like purl it like normal, or?
You will need to knit or purl into the leading leg. Now I'm just going to go right back here, not even going to do a short row or anything so that we get to it. And here's my first one. So this one it's in position. So it is a twist, as you can see. And I am going to need to knit into the leading leg. Now the leading leg is the one that presents first, not necessarily the one that is on top.
Yeah, because it's twisted. That was kind
of. Because it's twisted, exactly. Here it is again. So I'm going to knit into the leading leg, which you can see is the one that's presented first. And then I'm going to get to my right leaning ones, which, oh, look, the leading leg, the one that's presented first, is in back. So yes, I will need to knit through the back leg. There we go. So that I keep it exactly positioned as I want it to be positioned. I don't want to add yet another twist to it. So once again, we're going to see it again because here it is. The leading leg is the one that presents first. So yes, I will need to go knit it through the back. You see how I'm going through the back, still in the leading leg, but through the back, purl, and off. Now you see how it didn't move, it didn't twist again when it came off. It just simply stayed exactly like I intended it to stay. And there we go. So that is the backward loop method. Now I am going fast because we
don't have much time.
We don't have a lot of time. I'm trying to make it through.
I know.
This is
Should we take a little break?
Oh yes, absolutely.
We have a couple special things. Maybe I'll just place myself. We have a couple special things. So we've got a special discount code for you guys. So I just posted it here. I'll post it again. If you put in the code INCREASE at checkout, then you get 20% off. And we also wanted to share, we have we're doing lots of knit-alongs, which we're really having a lot of fun with. And our next one is this one. I'm going to post it in the chat too. But we are doing this feather shawl. So a giant shawl. And it is one of the new yarns for Zen, which Nick is going to show us a little bit more. But this is just a giant one, and we're going to do a couple modifications to change the sizing and things. But do you want to show us that yarn, Nick?
I can, and I can even show it to you.
Yay.
Nice and fine and dandy. Look at that. So this is the Nightshade Fingering. This is a new addition to our Zen Yarn Garden lineup. As you can see, it's got one of the 3 plies of this fingering is black. So what does it do when we dye it? It resists the dye. It says, I'm just going to stay black. And it gives this beautiful marled effect, which I think in the Hope and Feathers shawl looks really awesome.
Yeah, that's gonna be cool.
It looks really amazing. Now this color is called Party Girl, because, you know, we're all party girls at heart. And the kit comes with 1 skein of the natural and 2 skeins of whichever color you choose. So there we go. So that is the Nightshade Fingering.
Yes, and that one starts, or the deadline to sign up for that knit along is the 11th.
Yes.
So coming up here, and yeah, just a fun little fun thing. But now we can let Nick get back to.
She's trying to squeeze this into 30 minutes.
I know. You only have 3 minutes. How many more did you gonna get to? Just one more. Okay, one more. We can do it. We might have to go over a little bit.
Alrighty, so last but definitely not least is I've actually only ever seen it described as make one. I think it's a horrible name for an increase, but there we have it. It's called a make one. Now, a make one looks very familiar to the backward loop method. The major difference is that instead of creating it as you're knitting with your working yarn, you're actually going to go into the yarn, the running yarn between 2 stitches. You're going to go and grab that to create your stitch. So you're not using
this was like the lifted increase. Is that not? That's the other one.
Ish. It's
sometimes people
because the raised and lifted is it's kind of synonymous. So yeah. And I've only ever seen it described as a make one. So make one right, make one left. It gives a very, very, very similar result to the backward loop, except a little tighter, because instead of creating stitch from your working yarn, you're creating it out of the running yarn between 2 stitches. So you're actually pulling up everything. You're pulling up the 2 stitches next to it so that they're tightening up. Whoa. All right. Kind of like my yoga teacher tries to tell me to tighten up. All right, let's not go there. So make one right. Now, depending on which way that you're going to be picking up the yarn, either from the front or from the back, you see how it changes where your leading leg goes? Here we have the leading leg that presents in the back, and here we have the leading leg that presents in the front. Now, why is this important, you ask? Well, because it's going to change the direction of your stitch. It's also going to change how you have to knit into that stitch. Now, the one way that I remember how to do which one for a front or which one to go left and which one to go right is front has an F in it, and so does left. That's the only way I've managed. So the other one.
I do. I remember the saying like, I'll be right back. So if you're doing a right leaning one,
that's a good one.
or you left the front door open.
Ah, that is a good one. So I'll be right back. I like that, right back. So if I want a right leaning increase, I got to go through the back because I'll be right back. I love that. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yes.
So I'm going to go pick up this running yarn. Now, when I talk about the running yarn, again, it's wool, it's knitting. Don't be shy about, separating them. They will eventually just pop back. It's knitting, no worries. So as long as you're not dropping any stitches, you're good to go. So right leaning increase, I'm going to go through the back to pick that up. Now, this is where it's a little bit uncomfortable, I guess, is we're going to need to go through the second leg here, not through the leading leg, because what happens if I go through the leading leg the way that the stitch is presented? I get a big old hole. It becomes a yarn over increase. This is not what we want for a make one. What we want for a make one is something that is nice and tight and practically invisible. So what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to twist this stitch. So I'm going to have to go into technically the non-leading leg, let's call it that, which presents in front. And I'm going to go and knit this. Now it is going to feel awkward. I like to kind of just scooch it up from the back with my index finger in order to have a little bit of loose to play around with. So I'm going to go knit this right there. And once it's knit, look at that, a right leaning increase. I love increases, they're magical. I'm sorry, I get a little excited. All right, so once again, right leaning, make one. So a make one right. So since I'm going to be right back, I'm going to go through the back. So again, this is the yarn between two stitches. I'm not actually touching either stitch. Through the back. Now, I like to use my index finger here and just scooch the yarn up a little bit so that I have something to go poke into in order to knit. There we go. Once it's knit, I double check. Yes, it is definitely going right. We are golden. We can move on. Now, a left leaning increase. Left comes from the front. So again,
you
I'm going
left
to go
the
to the
front door open.
or the front door open. I left the front door open. So I'm actually now worried. I'm going to go check my front door. Funny how that works on your psyche. So again, the running yarn between two stitches, and I'm going to go from the front this time. Now, again, I'm not going to want to knit into the front leg here. Why not? Because, oh, look, if I knit it without twisting it, I just get a yarn over. It's not what we want. Well, I mean, unless that's what you're going for. This is not what we're going for. So make one left. Now I raised it from the front and I'm going to go knit into the back leg here. So I'm trying to scooch it down to show you guys. I'm going to go knit into this one here, the one that's in the back. So almost like knitting through the back loop. Well, it is knitting through the back loop. Knit. And once it's off my needle, I can even double check to make sure it is a left leaning increase. Now, once again, make one left, left the front door open. So I'm going to go front, and then I'm going to go knit into the back leg, the second one, not the leading leg, the back one. Knit. And then once it's off, I can even double check. Yes, it is indeed a left leaning increase. And we're done.
Yay.
Yay.
So we had a question. Can you show us the back side of all of those? That would be kind of fun to see too. So this is the knit front and back one?
This is the,
Or
nope,
maybe not.
Oh, did you want to, let's do them in order. Yes.
Back to
Good
order.
idea.
Okay.
Good idea. Let's show them in order. So we have our knit front and back right here.
So yeah, and then let's just also talk about how they might be written in the pattern. This one's obvious, KFB.
KFB, you'll see KFB or K1FB. Important to remember that the ones that are done on a stitch, so the bar or the raised increase, are interchangeable. If you want to change it with a yarn over a backward loop or make one, it will affect your stitch count. Because these ones, so the bar and the raised increase, you're knitting on a stitch, whereas the other ones you're doing something between two stitches. So if it says knit 10, knit 1 front and back, that's actually, you've used up 11 stitches. Whereas if it says knit 10, yarn over, you've still only used up 10 stitches. So do be careful if you're going to be interchanging, that the math works out. So back to our noodles. Here we go. So here we have our knit front and back. Now I'm going to show you the symmetrical side because the other one just makes me uncomfortable. So knit front and back, and from the back, here is what it looks like.
Still looks nice.
It still looks beautiful. Yes, it's actually almost invisible from the back, to be honest.
Yeah.
So there's one. Now, raised increase. So this one also worked in a stitch. So we have the right leaning and the left leaning. And from the back, it looks like this.
How is that abbreviated in a pattern?
It will say raised increase.
It will?
It's gonna,
Okay.
yeah, it's going to tell you exactly which increase. This is a very specific one to use.
Okay.
So most patterns will specifically tell you to use a raised increase.
Okay.
I've seen it as a lifted increase.
It
Right,
also can be
lifted?
written as a lifted increase, definitely.
But sometimes I see the last one you did called the lifted increase because you're lifting that bar in between.
Yeah.
So I think it would depend on the pattern.
It depends on the pattern. And I mean, a pattern should tell you, if it's telling you to use a certain increase, it should be telling you how to make it. So after that, it's really a question of personal choice and which one you want to use where. I find that this one, which is the raised increase, looks particularly beautiful in color work. Is my application of it. Is I will always modify my patterns, color work yokes, especially for low-pee sweaters, things like that, that have color work in the yoke on a top down. I find this particular increase is just stunning because it disappears into the color work entirely. So from the back, once again, there we go. Ta-da! So it is a little bit more visible from the back, I think. No.
But we had somebody that was asking because they were doing a sweater where it was like reverse stockinette. But in that case, you still might go back to like a stockinette, front side of stockinette just for the raglan. So I don't know, or the pattern might tell you. Just depends, right?
It could. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it does go back to the regular side, to the stockinette, the right side of stockinette, I should say. Sometimes it doesn't. If it is going to stay on the wrong side, I find that the knit front and back is actually the most discreet. Because of the bar, it just kind of melds into the wrong side of stockinette. So that's my 2 cents.
All right.
Alrighty. So, yep, from the back, here we go. I guess this one would be the least discreet of them. This one was the backward loop, which is very lovely from the front, I find. The backward loop is, I prefer it over a make one or the pseudo raised increase, just because it doesn't tighten knitting. So sometimes if you're doing shoulders, raglan sleeves and things like that, if depending on the type of yarn that you're using, the make one can tighten everything up and actually kind of shorten, and it'll pucker just the tiniest little bit. And I'm a little obsessed with non-puckering. So sometimes the backward loop is a better option just to avoid that pucker, because it does just, because you're adding in yarn as opposed to taking away from yarn that's already there. So there we go. Oh, wow, we totally went over. Any other questions before we go?
Yeah, thank you. I think that people seem to like that. They like your nail polish too.
Oh, thank you. So remember to use the discount code on the Zen Yarn Garden website, since they are so graciously hosting us tonight. Of course, we love Roxanne and Neville, so. So the discount code is INCREASE, I believe. Yes, INCREASE. Thank God that's spelled out, because I'm not about to win any spelling bees.
And
so
it
don't
is
forget
good
to use
on
that
all
code.
of the knit-alongs too that we have
Yes,
coming up.
it is
so.
applicable to everything on the website, including the grab bags, including the knit-alongs, hosted by Suzanne and yours truly. So yay, come and join us.
And next week we have another tutorial coming, right? So
we do. What are you teaching us next week, Suzanne?
I forget. I think it's mosaic. Again,
I think so too.
Yeah, so come join us for that. I'll have my act together by then.
Yes, and Roxanne just confirmed mosaic knitting next week.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
sauce.
sign up.
Please.
You do have to sign up because, you know,
Yes.
we don't want to have any Zoom bombing going on, but
yeah, no, not good.
yes.
So remember to sign up with plenty of time, because Roxanne does need to approve your email and you need to then sign up. So give yourself plenty of leeway to sign up and come join us and all our
And then you can
craziness.
add it to your calendar. Then you won't have to go searching
Yes.
for the email link.
Which has been a godsend for us.
That helps me a lot.
Oh, me too. Anything I don't need to do myself, right? So before we go, any questions? Because we went.
And it's recorded too, so you can go back and look at us.
Definitely. So feel free to come back to it over and over and over again every time you need to increase, which happens often.
Yes.
Unless, you knit scarves, which is fine, which is totally okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nick. It was
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks.
Thanks.